It was late when I came home from my second job, still in scrubs and sneakers, that smelled like disinfectant and break room coffee. My badge was digging into my collarbone. My back ached in that dull, nonstop way you only get from holding other people together. I kept telling myself I was doing what any responsible mother would do. 2 jobs, 2 11-year-olds, 1 roof. Groceries, gas, utilities, survival. I told myself this was temporary. That lie lasted exactly 3 steps past the kitchen. The washing machine was humming below me. The air drifting up from the basement felt wrong. It had that wet, chemical heaviness that always makes Jonah's chest tighten. Jonah is my son. His inhaler lives in my purse because I don't trust anyone else to notice the first wheeze. Lena is my daughter. She treats her instrument case like other kids treat diaries. They are twins. They are my entire reason. I walked down the basement stairs and stopped moving. 2 twin mattresses sat directly on unfinished concrete. No frames, no headboards. Just foam and thin blankets pushed into a corner like emergency bedding after a flood. Jonah's blanket was bunched near the water heater. His inhaler had been balanced on a cracked milk crate, like someone understood he would need it and also decided that was good enough. Lena's instrument case had been dropped beside a plastic laundry basket, as if her music had been demoted to clutter. Their clothes were stacked in uneven piles instead of drawers. Exposed pipes ran overhead. Bleach and damp metal hung in the air. No window, no daylight, no dignity. This was not storage. This was where my parents expected my children to sleep. My mother was upstairs holding my sister Marin's baby like porcelain. My father was probably telling himself that Beau, the baby, needed quiet and deserved the good room. They loved saying Beau deserved things. They never said Lena and Jonah deserved anything. In that moment, I felt something inside me lock into place. It wasn't anger the way other people picture anger. It was colder than that, cleaner than that. It was the point where you stop asking to be treated decently and start moving. I worked 2 jobs to keep this household standing. I came home and found my twins living in a basement utility room. That was the line. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't perform gratitude for people who had just pushed my kids next to a water heater. I turned, and in the calmest voice I have ever used in my life, I told them to get their backpacks, because from that second on, the story stopped belonging to my parents. If you were the one who walked down those steps and saw your kids sleeping on concrete while someone else's baby got the warm upstairs bedroom, would you stay and play nice for family, or would you do exactly what I did and end it right there? The morning had started quiet, the kind of quiet that tricks you into believing the day will behave. I woke before my children because I needed numbers more than I needed rest. I always start the day with numbers. Rent anywhere near their school district was higher than 1 paycheck. Even with overtime, it stayed out of reach. Utilities, groceries, gas, school fees, permission slips, inhaler refills, lunch money that schools pretend is optional but punishes you for missing. Every line item sat under my thumb in the Notes app on my phone. I scrolled, added, re-added, shaved imaginary dollars off totals that were already bare. Each time I did it, I repeated the same private promise. Hold on a little longer, keep both jobs a little longer, keep everyone fed a little longer. I told myself I was buying time. The setup in my parents' house had been presented to me as temporary. That word sounded clean when my mother first used it. Temporary sounded like a bridge, not a cage. I told myself adults sometimes have to go home, swallow pride, and rebuild. I told myself this was strategy, not failure. When the marriage finally broke, I refused to drag Lena and Jonah through another round of screaming match, custody argument, courtroom paperwork, lawyers who talk about children like property. We packed what we could carry. I drove back to the house where I grew up. I told myself I was doing the strong thing. Strong, in that moment, looked like surrender. Strong looked like saying yes when every nerve in me hated needing anyone. At first, it almost passed for normal. My father likes to look generous when people might be watching. Offering his oldest daughter and her kids a place to land let him feel like the steady head of the family. My mother, on the other hand, moved through her kitchen the way a nurse moves through a trauma bay, fast, controlled, territorial. She tracks groceries, schedules, tone, volume. She believes control and love are the same gesture. Lena and Jonah were given the upstairs spare room. They shared a mattress pushed against one wall and a second mattress against the opposite wall. It was cramped, but it was theirs for that one moment. They whispered to each other past the hour when they were supposed to be asleep, giggling in that breathy, secret way siblings do when they think they're getting away with something. For a few days I let myself believe that this could work. at least until I got our name on a lease again. I told myself, over and over, that this did not have to become permanent. Then Marin came back. Marin is my younger sister. She showed up holding her newborn son, Beau. The hospital bracelet was still tucked under her sleeve. Her hair was pulled into a loose knot that made her look breakable and tragic. My mother let out a sound I had never earned in decades of being her daughter. It was almost worship. My father stepped in like private security, taking bags out of Marin's hands before she even asked. In a single afternoon, gravity in that house shifted. Every conversation bent toward Marin's recovery, Marin's rest, Marin's stress level, Marin's future. It was immediately understood, without anyone needing to spell it out, that Beau was now the center of the household. It was not just that a baby had arrived, it was that a new hierarchy had been announced. I replay that first afternoon constantly because that was the last moment I existed as a person there. My mother guided Marin to the couch as if she were escorting royalty. My father carried in soft blankets and bottles like ceremonial offerings. My own name changed function. I was no longer Noelle. I became, silently, the person who heats bottles, the person who switches laundry, the person who runs to the store at the edge of midnight because the baby can't have anything cheap, the person who wipes counters, the person who straightens shoes by the door so nobody trips and wakes Beau. I watched my place in the house slide from adult daughter to household labor in less than 24 hours. It never balanced back. The language inside the house changed next. Beau stopped being the baby and became his development, his sleep cycle, his routine. Everything else was reclassified as interference. Lena's practicing? Interference. Jonah's coughing? Interference. My exhaustion? Interference. I would drag myself home after the overnight shift, shoulders buzzing with that hollow ache you get when your body is still moving but your mind has already given up. And the moment my keys hit the table a little louder than planned, my mother's face would harden like I had just disrupted something sacred. The message was simple: quiet down. Do not disturb the orbit forming around Marin and her child. Lena learned quicker than I wanted her to. She is the kind of kid who builds rhythm everywhere she goes. She taps patterns on her knees with stray pencils without even noticing. She hums while stacking plates. Music is how she keeps her balance. In our old apartment, before everything broke, she would sit cross-legged and work one small phrase of melody again and again until it sounded clean and bright. In my parents' house, she tried once. She pressed her instrument against a pillow to mute the sound. She kept it so soft I could barely hear it from the hallway. I watched her shoulders while she played. Every muscle was braced. She wasn't practicing. She was apologizing. Jonah is different. He is the kid who narrates facts. He tells you weather patterns from memory. He can identify birds from 2 rooms away. He describes the way metal smells after rain. He also has lungs that panic in damp air. He knows his own breathing better than most adults know their pulse. At first, in my parents' house, he kept his routine. Shower, inhaler, lights out, questions about outer space, sleep. Predictable, safe. After Marin arrived, that routine stopped belonging to him. I started finding him asleep on the downstairs couch instead of under a blanket in the spare room. He would fold himself small, hands tucked under his chest, face turned toward the back cushions like a kid hiding in plain sight. No one said out loud, "Your breathing is inconvenient." No one said, "Your curiosity is too loud." That is the part that still makes my jaw clench. Nothing cruel ever came in through the front door in this house. It always slipped in dressed like kindness. Boundaries for Beau's sleep were framed as medical necessity. Restrictions on noise were packaged as developmental care. My children's needs were not denied. They were quietly ranked under someone else's priorities. That is how control works in a household like this. It does not announce itself as control. It smiles. It calls pressure, help. It calls silence, respect. It tells you that you are fortunate. It reminds you that other people have less. It repeats, over and over, that you should be grateful to even have a roof over your head. Gratitude turns into contract. Contract turns into debt. Debt becomes the tool that lets them take more and more from you while insisting you're being cared for. By then I was giving more than I had. I took overnight shifts because someone had to cover formula, diapers, groceries. None of that landed on my parents' cards. Those charges landed on mine. I started picking up back-to-back days because the light bill had jumped and my father said money was tight this month, and he said it with the kind of tone that wasn't really a question. I told myself this is what you do for family. You do not walk away when blood needs you. You carry more, you bend more, You sleep less. You swallow discomfort because complaining would make you look ungrateful in the very house you are paying to run. While I was paying to keep the fridge full, choices about my children started happening without me. My mother began calling the upstairs spare room Beau's nursery, not the guest room, not the twins' room, not the extra space, but Beau's nursery, Beau's schedule, Beau's room. I heard that phrasing for the first time while rinsing out lunch containers at the sink. The words landed heavy. Somewhere between the time I clocked in at one job and clocked out from the other, that space had been renamed and reassigned. My father justified it in practical language. He likes sounding practical because it lets him feel righteous. Beau needed quiet. Beau needed circulation. Beau needed sunlight. Beau needed surfaces that could be wiped without dust. I stood there looking at the same four walls where Lena and Jonah had been sleeping, and I understood the translation. Beau deserved comfort, therefore my children could be moved. The speed of it told me this conversation had not been casual. It felt rehearsed, settled, agreed upon. It told me that detailed discussions about where my kids would lay their heads had been handled during hours I was not in the house. During those same hours, I was stocking meds, charting vitals, hustling between beeping monitors, stealing 5 minutes in a supply closet just to breathe and answer 2 texts. While I was keeping other people's families steady, my own family was redrawing my children's place in their home without even informing me. Lena sensed the shift before I did. She always does. She notices when a picture frame is a 1/4 inch off. That evening, she hovered in the kitchen doorway and did not cross the tile. Her shoulders were raised. Her jaw was locked. She held her instrument case against her stomach like someone might try to take it. Jonah stayed pressed against her side. He only shadows her like that when he thinks the ground is moving and he needs an anchor. They didn't rush me with stories. They just stayed close, the way satellites stay in the pull of a planet, not touching but circling, waiting to see if the center would hold. That was the moment I understood how fast Lena and Jonah were shrinking to fit inside a place they did not control. Lena, who used to fill any room with quiet melody and soft tapping, began walking narrower in a hallway she had been told was hers. Jonah, who used to narrate the world in nonstop detail, began storing questions in his throat instead of letting them out. I watched both of them measure themselves against a baby who had been alive for only weeks and decide on their own that they came second. Parents talk about fight or flight. We almost never talk about freeze. Freeze is what happens when a kid learns that their comfort makes the room tense. Freeze is what I watched take root in my son and my daughter. Freeze is what turned Lena's rhythm into still hands and Jonah's curiosity into silence. That was when I finally understood what gratitude meant in that house. Gratitude no longer meant thank you for helping us get through a rough patch. Gratitude had mutated into accept the terms, lower your voice, erase your needs, disappear into the background of Beau's orbit, and call that love. That realization sat in my stomach like metal. It was the first sign that I was not waiting out a minor inconvenience. I was standing inside a system that would always rank my children last and expect me to smile. And the house was already preparing to prove it. The day of the gathering had a specific kind of shine to it, and that shine made my stomach turn. My mother moves differently when she knows there will be witnesses. The counters get wiped twice. The good candles come out. The house loses its regular smell detergent and cooked onions and replaces it with something neutral and expensive, something meant to suggest that life here is gentle. My father becomes theatrical in a quiet way. He adjusts picture frames like they're part of a curated exhibit. He straightens a stack of mail with his thumb, not because he cares about clutter, but because he wants anyone who walks in to sense order. They like to look like the steady center of a large, grateful family. I know all of this about them because I have been used as part of that show for years. I know the script. I know when I am expected to stand in the kitchen, hair pulled back to signal that I help out around here. I know when I am supposed to look tired in a way that flatters their generosity, but not tired enough to make guests uncomfortable. I know when Lena and Jonah are supposed to appear, smile politely, and then disappear so adults can keep praising each other without interruption. The choreography is always the same. The roles usually do not change. This time, the energy in the house was different. There was a hum under everything, and that hum revolved around Beau. Beau is Marin's baby, and Marin is my younger sister. Technically, Beau is my nephew. In practice, that day made him feel more like a title. He was not just a child. He was the symbol everyone had come to adore, admire, rally around, and perform goodness for. When the relatives arrived, they did not even pretend to start with small talk. They spoke in soft voices and reverent tones, all about how proud they were of my mother for stepping up, how impressed they were with my father for being such a rock, how inspired they were by Marin for doing it all. The phrases circled like incense. My mother absorbed them like oxygen. My father tilted his chin the way he does when approval lands exactly where he thinks it should. Marin lifted her shoulders in a practiced shrug that said she didn't want the attention while absorbing every drop of it. It was a performance of humility, not humility itself. Beau was passed from arm to arm, like a prized object in a museum that everyone had paid to see. Every movement centered him, every hand gesture pointed toward him, every sentence used him as the anchor. My parents' house had been rebranded as the place where Beau was being raised right, where family pulls together, where love looks like sacrifice. Sacrifice, in this version, meant rearranging space, energy, and expectations around one small child. That word sacrifice was repeated with a kind of moral glow. It was always about what my parents had given up for Beau. It was about what Marin had endured. None of it acknowledged what Lena and Jonah had lost. Not even once. Their absence was not accidental. It was convenient. You can write any story you want if you edit out the proof that the story isn't true. My mother had staged the living room like a catalog. There were soft blankets draped over the back of the couch in colors that matched. There were burp cloths folded, not stuffed. There were bottles lined up on a tray in a way that felt more decorative than practical. The room had been turned into a backdrop for admiration. My father walked the early arrivals through, pointing out minor details like a tour guide for a high-end model home. It wasn't, here's where we sit and rest when we're exhausted. It was, here's the setup we created for Beau. Beau's bouncer, Beau's playmat, Beau's corner, Beau's schedule. The centerpiece of the tour was not the living room, though. The centerpiece was the upstairs. My father led people to the staircase with the calm pride of someone unveiling a project. He talked about how difficult things had been lately, and how they'd all had to rethink the layout of the house. He explained that Beau needed quiet, Beau needed stability, Beau needed routine. He said these things with a kind of patient authority, as if he were teaching a class on responsible caregiving. It was designed to sound selfless. It was designed to sound inevitable. The subtext was simple. We made changes because that is what good people do. I followed behind because I wanted to see what version of the story would be handed out. I have learned that in this family there is always the story of what happened, and then there is the version my parents publish for public consumption. Watching them rewrite reality in front of an audience has always given me that same pressure in my chest that Jonah feels in damp air. I had no intention of letting my children become a supporting detail in that rewrite. The upstairs bedroom, the room where Lena and Jonah had once whispered to each other past bedtime, where their socks had once lived in mismatched pairs at the foot of each mattress, had been dressed to perfection. The walls had been wiped down and repainted in a soft, safe color. The air purifier in the corner hummed like a piece of specialized equipment. The dresser drawers were labeled in neat handwriting. Tiny clothes in neat stacks, diapers in neat rows. A small chair beside the window my children had once used to watch the streetlights flicker at night, had been angled into the kind of reading nook you only see in parenting blogs. The whole room radiated a message. This child is treasured. That message held a shadow. The shadow was this: some children are not. I looked at that window and it felt personal in a way I cannot explain with polite language. My son has trouble breathing in thick air. My daughter needs light like most people need breakfast. That window had been keeping both of them steady. Now that window had been claimed for someone else, and displayed like proof of moral superiority. I could feel my heartbeat in my jaw. One of my aunts, a blunt woman who has never bothered to pretend she believes what she's told, scanned the room and nodded in approval. She has always been quick with judgment, and she was pleased. In her eyes I saw the story landing exactly the way my parents wanted. She saw my parents as saints. She saw Marin as a fighter. She saw Beau as worthy of ceremony. She saw a perfect little nursery. She did not see Lena or Jonah anywhere in it. I did. I saw Lena's careful effort to keep her instrument case from scraping the wall when she used to slip in and out. I saw Jonah's small pile of found rocks lined up on the windowsill, each one labeled in his head with its origin story. I saw the corner where Lena had once sat cross-legged and hummed under her breath, working out melodies she was too shy to play loud. I saw the spot where Jonah had fallen asleep mid-sentence after a day that ran too long for his lungs. Those details were gone from the room, but they were not gone from me. The relatives cooed over the paint color, the labeled drawers, the idea of routine. They admired my mother for welcoming everyone into her home without complaint. My mother accepted the praise like a medal. My father nodded in a way that turned all of this into evidence of his leadership. Marin did a soft, exhausted smile while adjusting the strap of her top, the universal performance of the overwhelmed young mother. The narrative was perfect. Beau was safe, Beau was supported. Beau was loved loudly. Marin was resilient. My parents were heroic. Love is loudest in that house when it has an audience. The problem with putting on a show is that sometimes the audience looks around and asks questions no one rehearsed answers for. It happened in a way that would have been almost funny if it hadn't been devastating. My aunt, the blunt one, tilted her head and scanned the doorway like she was doing inventory. She is not sentimental. She is practical. She notices what is missing. She asked, without softening her tone for anyone, where Lena and Jonah were sleeping now. The entire upstairs hallway tightened. It was a single question, but it landed like a dropped plate. In that second, I watched my mother's shoulders pull back. I watched my father's mouth press into the careful line he uses when something unpleasant needs to disappear. I watched Marin's eyes flicker, not with guilt exactly, but with calculation. This was not part of the script. The script did not include an audit of my kids. The script assumed no one would ask. I could feel Lena and Jonah at the edge of that silence. They were downstairs, because they had been told to stay out of the way, while everyone visited with family. They had been told this gathering would be easier if they stayed quiet. They had been told to give Beau space. They had been told, in all the little polite phrases that pile up like sandbags, that today was not about them. I knew they could hear footsteps above their heads. I knew they understood enough to know their place had been reassigned. I also knew they did not yet understand how invisible they had been made. My mother opened her mouth. I could almost see the words forming. She was going to smooth it. She always smooths it. She would have called the arrangement temporary. She would have wrapped it in language about family cooperation. She would have painted it as a thoughtful decision made for the health of a baby. She would have thrown a blanket of respectability over what was, in reality, displacement. That was the second I decided to burn the script. I stepped forward into that doorway because I was done being decorative. I was done letting other people talk about sacrifice in front of a staged nursery built out of my children's space. I was done letting Lena and Jonah become a footnote to someone else's applause. I was done participating in the lie that this house was lifting everyone equally. There are moments you can feel the air around you shift. It is not dramatic, not like a movie. It is internal. It is the click of a lock. It is the point where you stop swallowing and let the blade surface. My blade that day was simple truth. I told the room that Lena and Jonah had been removed from this bedroom so Beau could have it. I told them that what they were admiring, the paint, the purifier, the labeled drawers, the careful little reading corner by the window, used to belong to my kids. I told them that my son and my daughter were no longer sleeping upstairs. I told them they had been moved. I told them where. The quiet after that felt nothing like respect. It felt like impact. You can rearrange a story behind closed doors for months. You can repeat it to each other until you believe it. You can convince yourselves that comfort equals entitlement, that hierarchy equals love, that taking from older children to build a sanctuary for a baby is noble. You can do all of that and sleep fine at night. But the moment you lay that story in front of outsiders, the shape of it becomes visible. That shape was ugly. For the first time in a long time, I watched my parents' faces register something like exposure. It was not remorse. It was not empathy. It was the shock of being seen without their lighting. That look told me something important. It told me they knew exactly what they had done. It told me they understood how it sounded. It told me they had never expected to be held accountable out loud. And that is when I understood that politeness was never going to protect Lena and Jonah. It was only ever going to protect the people who benefited from hurting them. It was the last day I agreed to play nice. The kitchen came next. After the relatives left, the house did not return to normal. It adjusted itself around the wreckage of that afternoon. The air had a new temperature, cooler, thinner, sharp at the edges. My parents no longer moved through rooms. They patrolled them. Every gesture became deliberate, every silence loaded. The house felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been written, and I was expected to stand quietly while the sentence played out. Mom stopped looking directly at me. She perfected the kind of glance that slides past your face without landing, as if acknowledging me would make the tension real. Dad did not raise his voice. He never does. He punishes by arrangement. He changed small things, the car keys not where they usually are, the milk replaced by a new brand no one liked, the thermostat adjusted 2 degrees colder. The changes were too minor to name but too consistent to miss. They were meant to remind me who set the rules here. Marin kept her distance. She no longer hovered in the kitchen. She stationed herself upstairs, near Beau's nursery, always just visible enough to seem busy. I caught her reflection once in the hallway mirror. She was smiling, not a full smile, just a curved acknowledgement that she had survived the storm and I had not. She didn't need to say anything. In this house, silence has always been a language. Hers said, "You made yourself the problem." Lena and Jonah read the room faster than I did. Children always do. They learned the tone of their grandmother's footsteps, the rhythm of her sighs, the sharp inhale that came before a correction. They started whispering less. They began moving quietly even when they didn't have to. Their laughter, once easy, constant, shrank to quick, careful bursts that ended in glances toward me, as if asking permission to keep existing. I could feel their apology before they ever said it. They were apologizing for the noise of being children. I kept working both jobs. There was no other choice, but the house had turned my exhaustion into evidence. Every hour I was gone became another mark against me, another reminder that I was not pulling my weight. Mom began using that phrase, pulling your weight, in the same calm, superior tone she used for everything. It sounded less like advice and more like a verdict. Dad followed with his own version, the kind that sounded reasonable on the surface. Everyone sacrifices something. What he meant was, stop making us uncomfortable. That phrase, everyone sacrifices something, kept replaying in my head. It clung to me during overnight shifts, during grocery runs, during the walk from my car to the front door when the porch light stayed off. Sacrifice, in their mouths, meant silence from me and compliance from my children. Sacrifice meant pretending the afternoon upstairs hadn't happened. Sacrifice meant stepping back into my assigned role as evidence of their goodness. The next week blurred into chores and corrections. Mom moved through the kitchen like a ghost with a checklist. Her politeness was surgical. When she handed me a dish towel, her fingers didn't brush mine. When I spoke, she responded only to the parts that fit her narrative. The rest she left unanswered, letting it hang in the air like a mistake I would eventually have to apologize for. Dad stayed busy with projects, tightening screws that didn't need tightening, oiling hinges that didn't squeak, washing a car that was already clean. His energy was always directional. It pointed away from conflict, away from accountability, toward the illusion of control. When I passed him in the driveway one evening, he didn't even glance up. The space between us felt deliberate, curated, like another one of his adjustments. Inside the house, Beau's presence grew louder. His schedule dictated everything. Meals, lighting, television volume, all adjusted to his routine. It wasn't that anyone disliked Lena or Jonah. It was worse than that. They were forgotten. Forgetting is quieter than cruelty, but it cuts deeper. It tells you that you are not worth the effort of dislike. It tells you that your existence is background noise. I caught Lena one night kneeling beside Jonah's mattress, whispering something I couldn't hear. Their small shoulders touched. I wanted to reach out, to say that this wasn't permanent, that I was figuring it out. But I had run out of believable reassurances. Children can sense lies long before adults admit them. So I stood there watching them whisper to each other, and understood that I had already lost something irreversible, their sense of safety under this roof. The basement became part of their vocabulary. At first it was subtle. Boxes appeared. Laundry baskets shifted. A folded comforter was placed near the bottom of the stairs. The explanation was casual temporary storage just while we rearrange upstairs. I recognized the word, temporary. I had heard it before, months ago, wrapped in the same gentle tone. Temporary always meant permanent for someone else's benefit. One afternoon, I came home early from the clinic. My second job had been cut short because the system crashed. I remember the particular gray of the sky, the smell of wet pavement, the way my badge felt cold against my neck. I walked in through the side door, quietly, so I wouldn't wake Beau. I didn't expect to hear voices. From the kitchen, I heard Mom and Marin talking. Their tones were calm, almost pleasant. They were discussing how it made sense for the kids to have their own space. The words floated up through the air like dust, their own space. The phrase was surgical in its dishonesty. What they meant was separation. What they meant was containment. What they meant was, we've already decided. I didn't interrupt them. I walked down the hall to check on Lena and Jonah. Their things were half-packed, a few shirts folded unevenly. Jonah's inhaler balanced on top of a box, like someone had been careful enough to set it aside but not considerate enough to ask. Lena's instrument case leaned against the wall. She was tracing the handle with her thumbs, slow, rhythmic, like she was trying to memorize its texture. When she looked up at me, I saw recognition, not surprise. She had known before I did. That look broke something quiet in me. I had already spoken my truth out loud once, at the party. It hadn't fixed anything. If anything, it had made the walls close tighter. But there's a difference between being ignored and being erased. That afternoon, watching my children prepare to be moved again without consent, I understood the kind of erasure that comes dressed as reasonableness. Dinner that night was a silent transaction. Marin stayed upstairs with Beau, and the house revolved around her absence. Mom filled plates without meeting my eyes. Dad asked Jonah about school but didn't wait for an answer. The television hummed low in the background, tuned to a channel that played weather reports on repeat. The entire meal felt like a performance of normalcy, each of us acting out roles that no longer fit. Lena picked at her food. Jonah's fork scraped once against the plate and froze mid-air. I could hear the water heater clicking on below us, a dull reminder of where their beds would soon be. When the dishes were done, I stood at the sink long after the others had gone to bed. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. My hands rested in the cooling water. I looked at my reflection in the dark window above the sink and barely recognized myself. The exhaustion was no longer physical, it was architectural. It lived in the structure of my body. It had rearranged me. That's when I saw movement outside Dad in his robe, carrying a cardboard box toward the basement door. He didn't see me watching. The box was labeled with marker, winter clothes. But I knew the handwriting. It was Lena's. The letters curved in that careful, artistic way she uses when she's trying to make something neat. The box disappeared down the stairs, and the door closed quietly behind him. Something inside me settled with absolute clarity. Not anger, not shock, something colder, steadier. The kind of calm you feel when you finally understand there is nothing left to salvage. That night I didn't sleep. I walked the perimeter of the house while everyone else dreamed their clean dreams. I memorized the creak of the floor near the hall closet, the sound of the air vent opening near the stairs, the way moonlight fell across the boxes stacked at the bottom. Every detail was a kind of evidence. Every detail whispered the same sentence. You are no longer part of this family's definition of home. By morning, the decision had already taken shape in my mind. Not a plan yet, not an escape route, just a certainty. The kind that doesn't need words. The kind that changes how you breathe. I made coffee. I packed lunches. I tied Lena's hair. I checked Jonah's inhaler. I did every ordinary thing because that's what survival looks like before it becomes visible. I did not speak of it, not even to myself. But I knew. The leaving had already started. Dawn did not feel like morning. It felt like a clean break. The house was still. The kind of still that only exists before anyone else has opened their eyes, before the performance of normalcy has a chance to start. The hallway was dim. The thermostat hummed. The air carried that stale, recycled chill of a place that looks like a home from the outside but functions like a facility. I could feel the quiet pressing against my skin, testing me, waiting to see whether I would back down. I did not. I had packed in my head first. I had done that all night. I walked through every corner of the house and took inventory, not of furniture or clothes, but of what was truly ours. Some things were obvious. Jonah's inhaler, Lena's instrument, their school IDs, a folder of paperwork that proved I am their mother in a way nobody can challenge. Some things were less visible but more urgent. Cash that I had been setting aside in small, careful amounts, my car keys, my phone charger, the charger for Jonah's nebulizer, Lena's notebook where she keeps the music she writes but never shows anyone. What I did not pack was almost more important. I did not pack guilt. I did not pack nostalgia for a version of family that did not exist. I did not pack the version of myself that still believed I could make this house bend toward fairness if I just worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, paid enough, apologized enough. That version of me had been dismantled piece by piece. I was done carrying her. Lena woke before I touched her shoulder. I did not speak. I didn't need to. She looked at my face, sat up slowly, and held my gaze with a question I had watched build in her for weeks. Is it finally happening? Her eyes were clear. She moved with purpose, not panic. There is a kind of maturity no child should have to earn, and she had it already. She slid her notebook into her backpack and zipped it in one clean motion. She pressed the instrument case to her chest like it was a living thing. Jonah stirred next. He always curls himself small when he sleeps, like he wants to take up as little space as possible. That, more than anything, is what convinced me I was right to leave. A child should not sleep like an apology. I rested my hand on his shoulder and waited until his breathing evened out. He blinked up at me. His first instinct was to reach for the inhaler. Muscle memory. Survival. He tucked it into his hoodie pocket without being told. No complaints, no questions, just trust. Their readiness told me everything I needed to know about how much damage had already been done here. I moved through the rest of the house the way you move through a building that has already rejected you. No footsteps wasted, no unnecessary drawers opened. I took birth certificates from the file box in the hall closet, insurance cards, school forms, a copy of Jonah's prescription. The document that listed my number as the only emergency contact the school was authorized to call. I had already changed that detail the night before, alone at the kitchen table with my laptop, while everyone else slept. The school would no longer be told to reach out to mom or dad if something happened. They had lost the right to be treated like first responders in my children's lives. That was the first real act of separation. Not walking out, not loading the car. Paperwork. Paper draws a line and dares the world to cross it. I took enough clothes to last a few days. Not everything. I didn't bother folding. This was triage, not organization. Essentials only, breath before comfort, proof before sentiment. I left behind almost everything that existed to make my parents feel in control. Matching towels my mother had bought to keep the bathroom presentable. Framed photos my father liked displaying as evidence of a happy household. Bulky blankets that looked luxurious but smelled like the detergent Mom uses to claim a space as hers. I left behind anything that could be used later as leverage. I knew how this would be spun. I knew they would insist I had taken advantage of their generosity. I refused to carry a single item that let them claim ownership of our escape. There was no ceremony. Ceremony would have been for them. Ceremony would have been a scene, a confrontation, a storm of voices. I denied them that. I refused to give them the theater they craved. They thrive in theater because it lets them recast themselves as victims. Silence cuts off that oxygen. Silence gives you clean lines. Silence makes a decision real. In that quiet, I felt something like steadiness return to my body for the first time in months. My heartbeat slowed. My shoulders dropped from around my ears. My mind stopped running in circles and settled into sequence. Step, then step, then step. I understood in a physical way that I was not sneaking out. I was removing my children from harm. People talk about harm like it only counts if there are bruises. That is a comfortable lie. Harm can look like erasure. Harm can look like being told to take the leftover corner of a house you are helping to fund. Harm can look like being reclassified from family to inconvenience in real time. Harm can sound like polite voices explaining why your children's needs rank lower than somebody else's comfort. You do not have to wait for harm to leave a mark that strangers will recognize. You are allowed to name it before it becomes visible. I had spent too long waiting for visible. By the time the sun had started to pale the sky, we were almost ready. Lena's backpack was zipped. Jonah's jacket was on. My purse felt heavier than it ever had, not from weight but from importance. Everything that mattered fit in that one strap over my shoulder. Everything else could rot in that house, and I would not go back for it. I took one last slow look across the main floor. The kitchen sat in posed stillness. The counters were clean. The table was clear. The refrigerator hummed. The place looked calm, almost peaceful, like a picture in a rental listing. Anyone walking in blind would think this house was safe. They would think it was structured, stable, loving. They would not see the way my daughter had been taught to dim herself, or the way my son had learned to swallow his questions, or the way my own labor had been harvested and repackaged as proof of my parents' kindness. That is the trick with certain kinds of harm. It photographs well. I left my copy of the house key on the kitchen counter. I did not add a note. A note could be twisted, quoted back at me, dissected out loud later for an audience. A note would hand them material. I wasn't interested in giving them dialogue. I was interested in ending access. They would wake up and find absence. Absence is hard to reframe. Walking out the door was not cinematic. It was practical. It felt like buckling a seatbelt. It felt like exiting a building after a fire alarm. Not running, not screaming, not crying. Just moving because standing still is no longer an option and the body instinctively understands that. I guided Lena and Jonah to the car with the same calm I use when I am handling controlled chaos at work. Steady hands, steady breathing, eyes up, shoulders loose, fear tucked away where it cannot shake them. Jonah climbed into the back seat and pressed his forehead against the window, his shoulders lowered. Lena hugged her backpack to her chest and leaned back like her spine could finally expand. That small physical change, that loosening, was confirmation. I had expected nervousness. I had prepared myself for panic, questions, tears. What I got instead was relief. Quiet, immediate relief. Relief so strong it made my throat sting. I started the engine. I pulled away from the curb. I did not look at the house. Looking back would have stolen energy we needed for forward. Leaving a place like that is not only about extracting your body, it is about extracting your narrative. For months, the story had been, I was lucky to be allowed in that house. The new story was simpler and colder. My children and I are not extensions of anyone else's image. We are not proof of anyone else's generosity. We are not unpaid labor. We are not a footnote under someone else's miracle baby. We are not props. The drive to the apartment felt longer than it was. The traffic lights stretched. Each red felt like an accusation. Each green felt like permission. My mind cycled through contingencies. I pictured my mother calling, my father trying to sound reasonable, Marin accusing me of abandonment. I pictured the words I would not say back. I would not justify. I would not argue. I would not soothe their panic. Their panic, if it came, would belong to them. The building we were headed to sat near the highway, in that strip of town where the rent is lower because engines never stop humming and trucks rattle past at all hours. The paint on the exterior is tired. The parking lot is cracked. But that building had one thing my parents' house no longer had: safety that did not depend on pretending to be grateful. The colleague who offered us the space is someone from my shift. We have spent long nights together charting vitals under fluorescent lights, sharing protein bars in hallways, propping each other upright when our legs tried to quit. She told me once, quietly, that in her world, help is something you give without demanding performance in return. I believed her. I chose to believe her. I had to. When I unlocked that apartment door, the air felt different. It wasn't fancy air. It carried traffic noise and old carpet and a faint trace of takeout, but it was honest. Honest air is underrated. Lena stepped in first and scanned the small living room. Her eyes stopped on the window. Not a big window, not a perfect view, just glass and daylight. Her shoulders opened. I watched her breathe in like she had been holding air in her chest for weeks and could finally let it out. Jonah walked straight to the corner and tested the outlet with his charger. Practical, always. When it worked, he nodded once to himself, satisfied, like a technician confirming power. Then he sat on the floor and unzipped his backpack. He set his inhaler beside him, not clutching it like a lifeline, just placing it within reach. That detail mattered. He was not bracing. He was settling. For the first time in longer than I am willing to admit, I let my body feel what safety tastes like. It isn't joy. Joy is too bright for a moment like that. Safety is quieter. It's the release that happens when you are no longer being watched by people who consider your existence a favor they're doing for you. It's the first exhale after months of holding your breath without realizing it. I stood in that doorway and understood that there would be fallout. My phone would light up. Accusations would come. I knew the shape of them already. I knew I would be called ungrateful, dramatic, unstable, manipulative, disloyal. I knew they would tell people I had kidnapped my own children. I knew they would mourn their lost convenience like it was betrayal. Let them. They had lost access to my labor. They had lost their claim to my children's presence as proof of their goodness. They had lost the right to use Lena and Jonah as background decoration in the story they like to sell about themselves. In that moment, with the highway rumbling through thin walls, and my children sitting on a floor that was not polished or staged or claimed by anyone else, I felt something I had not felt since I first loaded our car and drove away from a marriage that was suffocating us. I felt like their mother again. What came next belonged to us. Morning came without ceremony. The new apartment did not have curtains thick enough to block the light, and the sun spilled in through the blinds like it had been waiting for permission. The air smelled faintly of detergent and asphalt. It was the smell of somewhere temporary and honest, a place not pretending to be more than it was. We were adjusting in small, awkward ways. Lena hung her backpack on a kitchen chair because there were no hooks yet. Jonah turned a cardboard box into a nightstand. I kept my shoes by the door so I could leave for work without waking them. The rhythm was uneven but ours. The silence that used to feel like punishment had turned into quiet that belonged to us. The first few nights, I woke up to check the locks. Old habits die in rituals of safety. I would press my palm against the cool metal and feel the confirmation that this door opened and closed only on my terms. That thin reassurance carried more comfort than any speech my parents had ever given me. The phone started ringing on the third day. Numbers I knew by heart, numbers I no longer wanted attached to my name. At first, I let it buzz, thinking silence would make the noise give up. It didn't. Calls came at strange hours, early morning, late evening, the gaps between my shifts. The pattern felt intentional, control disguised as concern. The voicemails followed, clipped tones pretending at worry. My mother's voice carried the practiced strain of someone performing heartbreak. My father's sounded measured, like a man drafting legal language. Neither asked how Lena and Jonah were actually doing. They asked where I thought I was going. The difference between those two questions is everything. I deleted each message as soon as it arrived. Erasing evidence of manipulation felt like sweeping dust from a new floor, not necessary, but cleansing. Marin tried next. Her messages were longer. She framed herself as the mediator, the misunderstood sister, the one caught in the middle. She used phrases like "they miss you," and "no one meant harm." She referred to Beau as if he were the center of some divine plan that I had disrupted. It was not cruelty, it was theater. She had learned from the best. None of them mentioned the months I spent working overnight shifts while they slept comfortably upstairs. None of them mentioned the basement. None of them said Lena or Jonah's names. Their silence on those details was their confession. I changed my number the following week. It felt like signing a contract with myself. No explanations, no warnings. People who have spent their lives using your boundaries as doorways do not deserve advance notice when you finally lock them out. Work became the axis that kept me steady. The hospital's noise was reliable, measurable, structured. Beeping monitors and rolling carts had rules that family did not. I could clock in and be exactly what I said. I was no hidden agenda, no emotional tax. My colleague, the one who let us stay, made coffee strong enough to burn through fatigue. She never asked questions about the past, only practical ones about scheduling. That kind of mercy is rare. After the first paycheck, I bought small things that were ours alone. A used lamp, 2 secondhand pillows, a thrifted mug with a chip on the rim that said "take it one day at a time." I didn't buy them for comfort, I bought them as evidence. Evidence that we were rebuilding from zero and choosing every piece ourselves. Lena started humming again. The first time I heard it, I froze in the hallway because the sound felt almost sacred. It wasn't a song I recognized, just a thread of melody weaving through the air like the ghost of a voice learning to trust itself again. Jonah began sketching floor plans on scrap paper, diagrams of where his things might go once we had furniture. Their imaginations had started to fill the empty space. That's how healing looks at the beginning, not grand, just the return of small, creative impulses. Meanwhile, the outside world adjusted its narrative without us. Relatives who used to nod politely at gatherings began posting photos with Marin, captioned with phrases about family strength. I scrolled once, then stopped. They had their stage, and I had my silence. Silence is the most underrated weapon. It cannot be misquoted. It cannot be performed. It denies the opponent material. The first letter arrived 2 weeks later. An envelope in my mother's handwriting, delivered to the hospital where I worked. She must have called human resources pretending it was urgent. The envelope was light, just a folded sheet of stationery that smelled faintly of her perfume. I didn't open it right away. It sat in my locker for hours, its weight growing heavier the longer I ignored it. When I finally unfolded it, the words were exactly what I expected, regret wrapped around accusation. She wrote about missing the children, never calling them by name. She asked if I realized what damage I was doing to the family's reputation. She used the word family, the way corporations use team to disguise hierarchy as unity. I tore the letter in half and threw it away. The trash can lid made a satisfying click as it closed. That sound stayed in my mind longer than any sentence she wrote. Freedom is not glamorous. It's exhausting in a different way. You trade visible control for invisible rebuilding. There were days I came home so tired I could barely lift the grocery bags. But exhaustion from survival is cleaner than exhaustion from manipulation. It drains you, but it doesn't humiliate you. The landlord gave us a month-to-month option. It was expensive, but it meant no one could force us to stay longer than we wanted. Lena started saving coins in a jar labeled Future. Jonah taped a drawing of mountains above his bed, mountains with staircases instead of cliffs. I asked what they were. He said they were places you could climb without falling. I wrote that line down later because it felt like prophecy. Then came the afternoon they showed up. It was raining, not heavy, just a steady drizzle that made the windows blur. I was folding laundry when I saw the car through the curtain slit. The same silver sedan my father drives, parked crookedly near the curb. The sight of it used to make my pulse spike. This time, my body stayed still. I watched as 2 figures got out, Mom with her umbrella, Dad without one. Their shapes looked smaller in the rain. They stood by the door, talking, gesturing, waiting. They did not knock immediately. They were performing patience for each other, giving themselves the illusion of dignity. When the knock finally came, it was firm but rehearsed the rhythm of people expecting obedience. I didn't move. I didn't tell the kids. The sound came again, louder, then silence. Then the shuffle of retreat. I peeked once more and saw them walking back to the car, wet shoulders shining under the gray sky. The umbrella closed before they reached the driver's side. That single image, my parents, small and unguarded, leaving without control, gave me a peace I hadn't known I was still waiting for. They never came back. Marin's posts grew fewer. Eventually, she stopped tagging them in pictures. I heard through a coworker who knows someone in their neighborhood that the arrangement in that house had collapsed. Without me there, Beau's care fell entirely on my parents. Marin started staying out later. My father's back pain worsened. My mother began missing her shifts at the library. The family that once demanded admiration was now devoured by its own performance. I didn't celebrate that downfall out loud. Revenge, when it's real, doesn't look like victory. It looks like indifference. It looks like no longer needing their apology to validate your decision. It looks like waking up one day and realizing you haven't thought about them in a week. By late spring, the apartment began to feel less like refuge and more like home. We bought a second-hand couch. Jonah found a plant on the clearance rack and nursed it back to green. Lena played her music without lowering the volume. There were arguments about dishes, laughter over burnt pancakes, small moments of ordinary chaos, all proof that life was happening on its own terms again. One evening, I stood by the window and watched headlights drift along the highway. They looked like slow-moving stars, each one carrying someone toward something unknown. I thought about how people confuse endurance with loyalty, how I had spent years mistaking survival for love. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living, quietly, on purpose. That was the difference I had fought for. Time moved forward. Time did what it always does. It kept moving even when I felt like I was standing in the wreckage of what used to be my life. At first I thought healing would look dramatic, like some sharp before and after moment. It didn't. It arrived in pieces so small I almost missed them. It started with mornings. There was a stretch of days where I woke up before Lena and Jonah and just listened. That was the first gift the new life gave me, the sound of my children sleeping without tension. There was no stiffness in Lena's shoulders, no shallow breathing from Jonah. No one curled into the tightest corner of the mattress just to take up less space. Sleep stopped sounding like survival. It started sounding like rest. I hadn't heard that in a long time. Jonah's lungs calmed first. It didn't happen overnight. It happened in the way he went longer and longer without reaching for his inhaler. It happened in the way he stopped scanning rooms for triggers. The constant vigilance faded from his face. He began speaking in full thoughts again, not clipped little bursts designed not to bother anyone. He brought home a science worksheet and spread it across the couch like an engineer planning a build. His questions came back, not as apologies, but as curiosity. That is how I knew his body finally believed me when I told him he was safe. Lena changed in quieter ways. With her, safety revealed itself as sound. She didn't ask permission to play anymore. She didn't tuck her notebook away the second someone walked past. Music slipped back into her hands like it had been waiting at the door. She sat by the window and wrote measures in pencil, erasing and rewriting until she grinned at her own work without checking to see who was listening. She took up space on purpose. She stopped shrinking to make room for someone else's comfort. There is nothing theoretical about watching your children re-inhabit themselves. It is not sentimental, it is physical. Their shoulders drop, their voices return. Their eyes stop darting to the doorway whenever they express joy. I kept working. There was no world in which I could stop working. Bills were still bills. Rent was still rent. Groceries still needed to be bought. Gas still needed to be paid for. School still sent home notices that sounded polite and urgent at the same time. But work shifted from desperation to structure. I was no longer killing myself to fund a house that erased us. I was building a house, in the emotional sense, that included us. At the hospital, I asked for stability in my schedule and, for the first time in years, I did not frame that request like a favor. I stated it like a boundary. I laid out what hours I could cover and what hours I could not. I offered solutions, because that's who I am, but I did not offer myself. That difference matters. Offering coverage is professional. Offering yourself is surrender. I had been surrendering pieces of myself for so long that I mistook it for responsibility. I don't make that mistake anymore. My colleague, the one who opened her door when I needed somewhere to land, kept showing up for us in quiet, consistent ways. She didn't hover. She didn't want credit. She just existed like proof that not all support comes attached to control. She helped me find a second-hand desk for Lena and a set of drawers that Jonah could claim as entirely his. The drawers did more than hold t-shirts and socks. They communicated ownership. These are your things, in your room, in your life. Nobody can quietly reassign them while you're gone. Ownership is dignity for a child. It is also armor. Around that same time, the last tie snapped between me and the house I left. Mom and Dad didn't reach out again. There were no more letters, no more cars, just happening to be nearby, no more messages through extended relatives. The pressure campaign failed, and with its failure came silence. Not peaceful silence, hollow silence, the kind that follows after an engine blows out. News about them stopped coming directly. It filtered in sideways, through people who still live in that neighborhood and like to narrate other people's lives the way some folks narrate the weather. According to them, the myth collapsed fast once I was gone. Without me there, the story my parents had spent months selling to family no longer held. It turns out praise dries up quickly when there's no one left to stage it. Relatives stopped visiting as often. No one was there to refresh the image, to keep everything polished, to perform selflessness for the room. When the admiration disappeared, so did the audience. My mother, who once glowed under compliments about how tirelessly she gives, was left with the actual work. My father, who loved being called a pillar, had to carry the weight he used to assign to me and call his generosity. The performance of sainthood became basic labor. And Marin, who had once positioned herself as the wounded center of the crisis, was finally required to function without a support staff. I heard she lasted a while by leaning on guilt. That's her instrument. She knows how to tilt her head just enough to look tired and just enough to look unfairly judged. That strategy may have worked on me when I was still trapped, because back then I was operating from fear. Fear that saying no would make me cruel. Fear that refusing to absorb everyone else's load would make me selfish. It doesn't work anymore. It stopped working the day I realized that helping family had been twisted into code for stay small and keep giving. When guilt stopped buying her coverage, Marin had to adjust. She found out what most people in this country learn the hard way. If you don't carry your own weight, eventually nobody carries it for you. She had to manage Bo's crying at night without someone to hand him off to at 2 a.m. She had to pay for formula herself instead of assuming I'd pick it up on my way back from a 12-hour shift. She had to make rent choices. She had to grow up in a timeline she didn't plan for. I don't celebrate her struggle. I just refuse to absorb it anymore. That's the part most outsiders never understand about leaving. They think the revenge is about making the people who hurt you suffer. It's not. Not really. The revenge is refusing to be the cushion that keeps their consequences from landing. When I left, I stopped cushioning. The fallout didn't just land on them. It lifted off of me. I saw it in my body first. The headaches that had followed me for months, the ones that pulsed behind my eyes like warning lights, faded. The tightness across my shoulders loosened. I started eating because I was hungry, not because I needed calories to survive my next shift. I didn't realize how much of my day had been spent clenching until, slowly, my muscles forgot to brace. That felt like betrayal in the best way, my own body, returning to me. Then I saw it in Lena and Jonah's world beyond our apartment. School called, not with accusations, with possibilities. Lena's music teacher wanted to talk about summer programs. Jonah's science teacher sent home a flyer for an enrichment group and a note about how his observations are unusually sharp. The words were simple, but they were the first official confirmation, from outside voices, that my children weren't problems to be managed. They were people worth investing in. I kept that flyer on the fridge for a week longer than necessary, not because I needed the reminder, but because I liked the way Lena's face looked whenever she walked past it. She glanced at it like proof. She saw herself reflected in something other than obligation. We started to talk, openly, about money. No secrets. I told them what bills cost. I told them what groceries cost. I showed them why lights have to go off when no one's in the room. We said out loud what so many families are trained never to speak. This is what it takes to keep us afloat. Shame didn't enter those talks. Responsibility did. Commitment did. Unity did. I wanted them to understand that I wasn't choosing fancy things over them. I was choosing stability for them. I promised them this. Whatever we build, nobody will take it from you because it makes someone else more comfortable. They believed me. That belief changed everything. For a long time, I thought I owed my parents something. That belief lived in me the way weather lives in bone. I mistook survival for gratitude and obligation for love. I thought I was a bad daughter if I asked to be treated like a full person. I thought carrying more than everyone else was proof that I was strong. I thought endurance was the same thing as loyalty. Now I understand what loyalty actually is. Loyalty is putting food on the table for a child who trusts you. Loyalty is sitting next to a kid during a late-night cough and keeping your hand on their back until their breathing evens out. Loyalty is showing up to every hard thing, not because somebody will praise you for it online, not because it feeds your image, but because you said, "I've got you," and you meant it. Loyalty is not letting people treat your children like spare parts so someone else can feel important. Loyalty is not allowing yourself to be turned into free labor and then being told to smile about it. Loyalty is not staying in a place that breaks you and calling it love. I don't talk to mom, I don't talk to dad, I don't talk to Marin. That is not a pause. That is not taking time. That is a decision. People act like blood is a contract you can't renegotiate. It isn't. Blood is biology. Relationship is choice. Respect is earned. Access is granted. I revoked access. There's a line people love to throw around, but they're family, as if that sentence should end all discussion, as if family is a magic word that cleans up anything done under its banner. Here is what I know now, and what I want anyone listening to me to hear clearly. Family is not a free pass to treat someone like property. Family does not excuse displacement. Family does not mean you are required to fold yourself small enough to fit under someone else's comfort. If family demands you disappear, it's not family, it's control. Walking away from that control did not make me cruel. It made me accountable to the two people I am actually responsible for and to myself. Sometimes, late at night, I stand in the kitchen of our apartment, and watch the small signs of a regular life. Jonah's shoes by the door, Lena's pencil shavings near her notebook, grocery store receipts tucked under a magnet, a stack of clean scrubs on the chair because I haven't put them away yet. None of it would impress anyone. None of it would get applause. But every single piece of it is honest. No performance, no staged generosity, no pretending. That quiet, unremarkable honesty is the exact thing I fought for. People romanticize revenge. They picture a grand confrontation, a dramatic takedown, a speech that leaves everyone in stunned silence. That's not how it usually works in real life, especially not in this country, especially not for mothers who work and pay their own bills and don't have anyone to fall back on. Real revenge is quieter. Real revenge is paperwork and car keys and rent checks. Real revenge is putting your name and only your name on the emergency contact form. Real revenge is being unreachable when people who harmed you want you back because they finally felt the weight you carried for them. Real revenge is thriving where they swore you could not survive without them. I am not interested in rebuilding bridges. Bridges are invitations. Invitations can be exploited. My boundary is not anger anymore. It's clarity. The door they once stood behind and knocked on in the rain will stay locked, not because I hate them, because I finally love us. This is what nobody told me when I was younger. When I first started believing that martyrdom was the price of being considered a good daughter, you do not owe your peace to people who are comfortable taking it. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to protect your children. You are allowed to rewrite the story and refuse to hand over the pen. You are allowed to choose a small apartment over a big lie. You are allowed to outgrow people who refuse to respect you. You are allowed to build a life that looks modest from the outside and call it successful because inside it is kind. If you ever find yourself standing in a place where the people who claim to love you are the same people teaching your children they deserve less, understand this. Staying is not loyalty. Staying is compliance. Leaving is love. And love, the real kind, is the only legacy I'm willing to pass down.